that just got appointed to Maine's PM,
Wow.
and she's really smart.
I think most of the people on board are smart themselves. They're comforted.
And Dawn knows her too.
Who?
Sharon Treat.
Oh, yeah, I go way back with Sharon, I think I used to met her in like 1986.
But she's on Maine's PM.
Wow. It's small.
Ready to start?
Sure. And do we have the results on mail? And then Todd wanted to have a link as
I
well.
sent a link to everyone. I don't see them coming up as candidates yet.
Todd's-
I sent it to Upton Hatfield.
Okay, good. Email. All right. Love technology.
Guess
That's
Can
okay.
you hear me now?
Should be okay.
How's that? All right, it's 9:36. My name is Gary Merchant, Chair of the New Hampshire Prescription Drug Affordability Board, and I will call the meeting to order. Introductions. Again, Gary Merchant, State Legislator representing Sullivan County District 6, and also the Chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. And I will go around the table.
Bob Woodward, Professor Emeritus, UNH Health Economics, a alternate member.
Cindy Rosenwald, now full member, Senate District 13.
Jason Matthews, Director of Health Economics at the Insurance Department, alternate appointment from the Governor's Office.
Thank you. So for a quorum, at this point in time to establish a quorum, I will elevate Jason, to Dr. Ezis to full member in, if Todd Fahey's not here. And also is Senator Rosenwell, myself, that would give us 3, which is a quorum. By the way, I found out that the quorum of a board no longer has to be a majority, only has to be a third. State law, they changed it, only for state boards. If a county, municipality and so forth, it still requires a physical quorum, but in the state boards, it's now down to a third.
Just boards,
Just boards.
not commissions.
No.
Okay.
This is a board.
Ah.
So that's my understanding according to the RSA. So we have established a quorum. For the agenda review, I'd ask the board to review the agenda. Is there anything that people would like to change on the agenda or to move around? Senator Rosenwell?
I'm wondering if we could move public comment up to next.
Sure. Everybody have an objection to that? We'll do that.
Thanks.
October 30 minutes have to be done next time because they need to be posted on the website a month before, sorry, a week before. So we'll delete that.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about that? I wasn't at that meeting, obviously, but there was a non-public. Was there a non-public session? Were there minutes from that non-public session that
Yes,
we just haven't seen yet?
yes,
Okay,
they'll be coming to the board as well.
and we'll maybe be taking a vote to make them public. As required by
Correct.
91.
No, we sealed the minutes, so we sealed it. Now, if we want to make them public, then we have to vote to unseal them.
Okay,
That's my understanding. Is that true? Looking for the charge. Okay.
but when the issue for making them sealed goes away, we should be making them public.
Correct.
Thank you.
That was not the 30th, but the 16th.
The 6th, oh, it's the 16th.
16th, that was the time we were having the personnel.
Mhm.
And once we get into the onboarding and so forth, we can release the minutes at that point. But again, subject to a board approval.
Great.
Yep. For any other topics that people want to talk about that I didn't put on the agenda? If not, then let's go to public comments. I invite the public to make comments. Please,
Howdy.
hot seat.
I want to come up with my daughter, Rose,
Oh, sure.
and we can go wherever you want us to go.
So you give me a seat next to each other. How's that?
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, over there.
Dad's gonna have the
Is it okay if I?
hot seat, and you'll have the semi-hot seat.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today, and thank you for moving public comment up in the agenda. I'm just gonna try and peer over the computer
That's all
so I
right.
can see Senator Rosenwald. I'm Donald Crease of Concord, and for the past almost 8 years, I've had the honor of serving as New Hampshire's consumer advocate, which means I run a very small but very feisty state agency that represents the interests of the state's residential utility customers at the Public Utilities Commission and everywhere else. Although being consumer advocate means I know a thing or two about how to set fair prices for essential public goods and services, I'm not here today in my official capacity. I am rather here as a dad. Specifically, I'm here as the dad of the remarkable young woman sitting next to me. Rose is fresh off the experience of testifying remotely before your counterparts in Colorado. I'm going to let her tell you all about that. I just want to make sure you, as fellow state officials, know how important your work is to folks like us. For the past 3 years, both Rose and I have been affiliated with ICER, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review. I serve on one of the 3 independent appraisal panels that ICER convenes to deliberate on the detailed reviews that ICER conducts about the cost effectiveness of new drugs. Why do I do that? Because Rose's annual pharmacy bill is routinely a multiple of my annual salary as a state employee. I worry about the implications of asking my fellow state employees to pay for cystic fibrosis drugs, because Rose has cystic fibrosis, that can cost our prescription drug plan hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So I'm proud to live in one of the 10 states that has a prescription drug affordability board. And yet I know that Big Pharma would like to put this board out of business. Please do not let the general court abolish New Hampshire's PDAB. Indeed, please call on me whenever I can help you strengthen your. With that, I have the honor of introducing my daughter, New Hampshire born and bred Rose Keller.
Thanks, Dad.
I've never gotten to do that before.
And thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you today. Like you mentioned, my name is Rose Keller. I'm a 22-year-old Bowdoin College student living with cystic fibrosis. And as the inexorable march towards graduation day continues, and as I consider moving back to New Hampshire, I can't help but be grateful that the state has a PDAB that sets spending targets. I only wish it could do more. I wish it could do more because Vertex Pharmaceuticals, the company that manufactures Trikafta, a life-changing drug for most CF patients, has leveraged its monopoly to set an unconscionably high price that far outpaces the treatment's substantial benefits. When Vertex is allowed to do this without consequence, patients who still get to receive Trikafta will be okay in the short term. But in the long term, allowing pharmaceutical companies to price gouge beyond any semblance of affordability causes harm to patients, CF and otherwise. As the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review's 2020 evidence report reveals, even if Trikafta cured cystic fibrosis entirely, it still wouldn't be economically sustainable or a worthwhile burden to impose on society given its cost. Ultimately, patients will be forced to delay or entirely go without treatment if these pricing trends continue. I am not comfortable with burdening my community with rising healthcare premiums just to satiate Vertex's near infinite avarice. I should mention that I'm not eligible for Trikafta. My mutations make me fall into the final 10% of cystic fibrosis patients still awaiting their medical breakthrough. I do worry, however, that when my miracle comes, the drug company will charge an even more outlandish sum for their product. Allowing Vertex to unilaterally set prices with total disregard for their cost effectiveness is a very dangerous precedent to set. Like Doug mentioned, just a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of testifying before the PDAB in Colorado, an agency with a capability to set upper payment limits. As a patient, I want to mention that I look forward to the day when this agency has the statutory authority to do the same. In Colorado, ultimately, the board decided that Trikafta was not unaffordable for Colorado consumers and thus ineligible for an upper payment limit. This was an understandable decision given their statutory language. For cystic fibrosis patients, thus far, Trikafta comes with near zero out-of-pocket costs for Colorado consumers, thanks to generous copay assistance programs, largely Vertex's. As a state agency currently charged with identifying strategies to optimize spending for public payers, a future invigorated iteration of the New Hampshire PDAB with more teeth might be better positioned to take action against drugs with generous assistance programs that are otherwise contributing to systemic affordability issues. My ultimate point is the pharmaceutical industry and the patient advocates it funds will try, if they haven't already, to convince you that PDABs pose a threat to patients. I'm here to say that precisely the opposite is true. Thank you so much for your time and the important work you do here. My life will be better for it.
Thank you. Imagine how awesome she's going to be after she gets to law school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for moving the public comment up. We're kind of curious about what the biosimilars presentation is all about. So we're going to hang out and listen to
You may
that.
want to hang out if you have time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Now that you've driven down electric rates.
I saw that. That's another affordability issue. Right. All right. Is there any other public comments at this point in time? People want to make a presentation to the board? At the end, we'll still have public comments if people want to make a public comment after the presentation, so we will go back to that as well. We have two presenters coming in. Okay. For the board approval, we do have the minutes from the October 16th. That was taken, just so people understand, when we met on the 16th, we have to meet in public. And then there's no such thing as a non-public meeting, it's a non-public session of the meeting. So therefore, what we have to do under 91A, you open in public, then we take a vote by the board to go into non-public. And once we come out of the non-public, we vote to seal the minutes. And then at that point in time, move forward back into the public session. So this is a very brief synopsis of what happened on the 16th. Back to Senator Rosenwald, once we get through the personnel issue, if the board feels comfortable, we can take the minutes from the non-public and make them public. But that's where we are now because of personnel issues.
But we haven't seen them.
No.
Okay.
Those will be coming probably sometime, right? Before next meeting, maybe. Okay, actually, we don't need to see them now until probably after the personnel issue has been resolved. At that point in time, we should be able to look at them. So before us on board is a very short synopsis of that process we went through. So I wanted to give people the backstory of why it is so short this time compared to what they have been in the past. So I'd like to have a motion on the floor.
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Second. And do we have anyone on the Zoom? That's. No, then I'll just have a, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstain? The ayes have it. October 30th minutes are here, but they cannot be voted on until they're posted on the website 7 days before the meeting. Because the law requires any documents that we look at the board have to be made available to the public 7 days before the meeting. So we'll do that in the January timeframe. legislative updates, Dr. Sherman will be here around 9:50, maybe 9:55. When he gets here, we can go back to legislative updates. He talked to Jess Edwards about an amendment to the bill that he was introducing about the conflict of interest of board members and so forth, et cetera. So he wants to update the board with what's transpired. There's also two other bills that are out there. One, I misunderstood. I thought the fiscal note had to be signed off on before I could sign off on it as a legislator. Misunderstood. So I missed the window on the LSR to extend the 2 years to 4 years on the executive director, plus eliminate the requirement for the contracts to go to fiscal committee. So I will work with the speaker or work with the clerk to find out if I can, through Jess Edwards LSR, if we can amend that one to include that part of the language. If not, we may have to go through a non-germane amendment. But I'll find out what we have to do to correct it. The third one is the biosimilars, and as going forward, I have been contacted by Amgen about some concerns they have with the bill. And fundamentally, what that comes down to is that if you look at the way the generics, if you will, if you have, this is the brand name, and you have generic A and generic B, all the manufacturer has to do is show bioequivalency between the generic and the brand. The generic and the brand. They do not have to show bioequivalency between the two generics. In the biosimilar space, what I'm trying to be sure of, because a lot of it's controlled by state statute, is that if you have a reference product, which is the brand of biosimilars, and the FDA says this product is interchangeable with the studies, with this product, which is the reference, and this product is interchangeable with the reference drug, therefore, by default, these two drugs are interchangeable. And that's what I'm trying to put through state statute to allow for greater mobility and market adoption between the biosimilars. Just to give you a heads up about the issue, if you look at Mark Cuban and his program, he's had less than 5,000 prescriptions for generic Humira. And trying to understand why the adoption has been so limited in that space, because it's a tremendous discount. It's an 85% discount off those prices. But the uptake has been extremely small. So the question is why? But hopefully with the Mayo Clinic conversation, we can get down to some of that granularity. Senator Rosenwald?
There's another bill, there's a Senate bill from, I think, Senator Innes that has to do with patient assistance programs counting towards copay. It's sort of a national effort that is being rolled out, so that's something we might want to do.
Yeah.
I don't know what the bill number is.
And that's
Curtis
Possible.
probably does.
okay.
I have not memorized the Senator. Thank you for your comment. But I'm familiar with it.
What was it?
I
He didn't memorize
I
it.
didn't memorize it. All right.
Maybe Heidi knows. Did
There
you
you go.
memorize it?
It may be Senate Bill 555, but I like Curtis, I haven't memorized these yet either, so
Okay.
don't.
Okay.
quote me on that.
But that's something that we might want to just keep an eye on.
I see a, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Ticky, are you ready to do a presentation a bit early? Can I call upon you if I know we said 10 o'clock, it's 5 to 10, I don't wanna.
She's muted.
Yes,
You're-
I am certainly ready if you guys are ready.
Ready. Well, with that, I will introduce the speakers. I'm very proud to present Dr. Chelsea Johnson and also Dr. Eric Ticky. I think I say your name. So they're both on the faculty with the medical school and the Mayo. Not sure exactly which medical school. I think it's the Mayo Medical School. But they're coming to us. What triggered this? To give you some background. There was an article that I came across via Tom Sherman, Dr. Sherman, and talked about what Mayo has done with the biosimilar space, because a lot of times they're not like true generics. They are similar, but they are proteins, therefore they're not truly a identical chemical. So therefore, what Mayo did was trying to go back to their clinicians through their formulary process to try to increase the market, what I call the market adoption, the utilization of biosimilars to bring down the overall drug cost. So that's the backstory of what they're presenting to us today. So Dr. Jensen, if you want to take it away, I don't know if you want to add anything to your introduction that I did not do, but thank you for both being here.
Thank you very much, Representative Merchant. Very, very appreciative to be here and appreciative to present to you all. Yes, so what we will be talking about is biosimilar implementation and optimization, some biosimilar basics, our Mayo Clinic biosimilar first strategy, and some recommendations for sustainability. Neither myself nor Dr. Tishy of the Mayo Clinic pharmacy supply chain have received any financial support or commitment for services from the New Hampshire Prescription Drug and Affordability Board. First, I kind of would like to talk to you all about biosimilar interchangeability. An interchangeable biosimilar is a biosimilar that may be substituted by the pharmacist without contacting the prescriber. The biosimilar applicant included additional requirements such as switching studies if applicable, or they simply applied for interchangeability on their FDA application. Both biosimilars and interchangeable biosimilars are safe and as effective as that reference product. The key takeaway here is that interchangeability removes operational hurdles, but it does not infer more safety or efficacy compared to non-interchangeable biosimilars. And one example I would like to provide here is that the FDA has determined that for ranibizumab, which is Lucentis, that product actually does not require switching studies. So Cimerli was the first interchangeable biosimilar because they applied for interchangeability on their FDA application. And recently they had exclusivity on interchangeability for 1 year. Now Byooviz, which is the other ranibizumab biosimilar, also has interchangeability status. So just wanted to provide that example. But again, both would be considered as equally safe and effective as that reference product. Biosimilars, they're not generics, but they're close enough. So biosimilar, as Representative Merchant mentioned, is a biologic medication. It is a highly similar biologic product already approved by the FDA. You'll see in literature that a reference product or a branded biologic medication might be referred to as a reference product, an innovator product, or an originator product. Throughout this presentation, I will refer to it as a reference product. Most times, biosimilars are available at a lower cost compared to the reference product, but it's truly dependent on insurance coverage and the patient's benefit design. The approval pathway differs, so generics are approved via the abbreviated new drug approval pathway, or the ANDA pathway. There's also an alternative pathway called the 505(b)(2) generic pathway that they could be approved that way. Biosimilars, because they're biologics, are approved under the biologic license application. Again, the difference would,
Dr. Jensen, do you
Yes.
want hold our questions to the very end or ask questions along the presentation?
Whichever would be fine. If you guys would like to ask questions now, I'm happy to take a question.
But I was saying, I'm the least knowledgeable person on this board. Are we talking about large molecules versus small, like the biologic drugs, and that's why they're non-generic?
Dr. Jensen, could you address that question?
Yes, I would say when we're talking about a brand medication, like you might be on a statin that lowers your cholesterol, that drug is made mostly via chemicals, kind of in a chemical plant, mostly just with chemical agents, where a biologic is kind of made from a living organism and manipulated from something that's growing in a petri dish. So it's a little bit different. Does that help answer that question a little better? And there might be more clarity as the presentation goes on as well. Dr.
Jensen,
Chair, I would say yes, it is larger. These are large molecules that we're talking about, and they have a different pathway for approval.
Okay.
Doctor, also, can you speak to the fact that one, I think, touched upon the petri dish, the living organism, that one is really kind of a protein and the other was a chemical?
Correct. Yes. So we would consider those, yeah, more of the protein structure versus a chemical structure. That would be accurate.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay.
And why is it dependent on insurance coverage and benefit design? And we talk about lower cost. Wouldn't the cost be the same regardless? I mean, isn't that when the manufacturer sets their cost or sets their price, or does that come up later in the presentation?
This will come up later in the presentation. Yes. And we
Thank
can
you.
certainly address more questions at that time as well. Okay. So again, living organisms are large molecules versus chemicals, but there are no clinically meaningful differences from the reference or branded product. You can expect the same safety and efficacy, and both generics and biosimilars, when the FDA is looking at them, they are again comparing it to the reference product or comparing that generic to the branded product. So it's being compared to that original product that's in the market. When we talk about extrapolation, basically this is to just demonstrated that biosimilars can be approved for indications which they were not studied. So when we prove that a biosimilar has enough similarity to that reference product, we can justify use for that reference product's indications. Some exceptions might be, though, if the reference product has an indication that's protected by a patent. So let's say a drug came to market, it was approved in adults. A few years down the road, it's studied in pediatrics and it gets a pediatric patent exclusivity. We might see a biosimilar come to the market only approved for adults because that pediatric use is still protected by a patent. So what we see this in the market, we call it has a skinny label. So it's a little bit fewer indications than the reference product, but again, not due to a concern over safety or efficacy, due to the patent protection on that.
Dr. Jensen, how is that different? This here with biosimilars, say to a generic, is the same issue of similarity? What do you want to call off-label use?
Yes, I think we have seen that in branded products too. A branded product could get a different indication and that would be protected by a patent. And when that generic product comes to market, it's probably only asking for indications that the patent has expired, that are no longer protected.
Thank you.
So this reviews the approval pathway for biosimilars. The Biologics Price and Competition and Innovation Act, or the BPCI, was enacted to abbreviate the biosimilar pathway and expedite lower cost options to enter the market. The requirements for biosimilarity was that it would be highly similar to the reference product, notwithstanding minor differences in clinically inactive components. There is no clinically meaningful safety, purity, or potency differences between the biologic product and the reference product. And this is the stepwise evidence for development. So this is one thing we had to talk to our physicians about, that FDA is not reviewing a large clinical package of trials. What the FDA is looking at for biosimilars is based on analytical data, then non-clinical data, then pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic, which means how does the drug work on your body and how does your body work with the drug, and immunogenicity, meaning are you developing antibodies to that drug in your body? If there is still uncertainty by the FDA after looking at those lower parts of the pyramid, then they might go to the manufacturer and say, we still have questions. We do want you to complete clinical trials, but that's not required. And again, that would be requested by the FDA if they had uncertainty with the package. I just want to emphasize on this slide that there are emerging studies supporting biosimilar switching. I've listed here several meta-analyses that are out there. And the European Medicines Association, or the EMA, has approved 86 biosimilar medications since 2006. The medicines have been thoroughly reviewed and monitored over the past 15 years. And the experience from clinical practice has shown that in terms of efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity, they are comparable to their reference products and therefore interchangeable. And this is from Amir Cook of the EMA's executive director. So again, in Europe, biosimilars are interchangeable based on all their experience in the market.
Dr. Jensen, before
Yes.
you move on, when we talk about interchangeability in the European market, do they have to go through interchangeability studies, or is it just once it become a biosimilar shown clinical efficacy and so forth, that in by itself means they're interchangeable?
That's how I would understand it, that their clinical experience on the market, they're not performing necessarily those strict switching studies. They're saying we have enough experience with use of biosimilars. We feel comfortable that these are now interchangeable, that we wouldn't have any concerns switching back and forth between the products.
So can the interchangeability of the switching back and forth be done like we do with generics today? Be substituted at the pharmacy, or does that require the provider who wrote the prescription notification to the provider to approve it?
In Europe, because they've determined they're all interchangeable, it would not require an intervention by the pharmacist. The pharmacist could substitute without contacting the prescriber.
Thank you.
What I wanted to do is include this slide because if you look at some of the literature that I've included on the prior slide, there's many types of biosimilar switching that you might see out there in the literature. So again, a cross switch, meaning that I started the patient on this biosimilar, but next year they changed insurance and their insurance said, nope, we don't cover that biosimilar. We need to go to a different one. So they might have switched from reference product year 1, biosimilar A year 2, over to biosimilar B year 3 because of those insurance changes or potentially institutional preferred product changes. So I just wanted to provide this slide as a demonstration of what you might see in some of that literature if you deep dive into it.
Dr. Jessup, sorry, questions. Again, back to the bill I'm trying to introduce, I have introduced soon to the House here in New Hampshire, biosimilar A1 and biosimilar A2, which is called a cross switch. The FDA does not require studies for that. It's basically generic, if you will, interchange at that point.
Correct, yes. And again, the FDA will not have done studies on this, but I'm just saying, I do believe this is occurring in the real world because of insurance mandated changes. I would say, I think this is what we've seen in the literature and what is coming out in some of those prior studies that we're seeing.
So in regards to the state level substitution or switching, is that controlled by state law or by federal law?
It would be controlled by state law, and we'll talk more about that P&T structure and therapeutic substitution later on in this presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's talk about some biosimilar economics. Biologic agents, again, drugs made from living organisms, account for 80% of the top 25 drug expenditures in clinics and hospitals. Greater than 50% of all US prescription drug expenditures, and that was exceeding $250 billion in 2020. Biologics have demonstrated sustained price increases exceeding inflation yearly for nearly 3 decades. With biosimilars, competition drives down cost more. So the more biosimilars that are in a given class, the lower costs tend to be. This has arrested the overall historic rate of price increases for branded drugs. And biosimilar competition led to reduced spend in oncology clinics and hospitals in 2020 and 2021. Here, these are live links, but these are simply different resources that the FDA has out there for patients on biosimilars as well as providers on biosimilars. There's also many different outlets of continuing education for various provider levels, all the way from nurses to pharmacists to physicians, about biosimilars and their approval pathway and their use in humans. So now I'd like to cover our Mayo Clinic biosimilar implementation process and results. Yep.
Dr. Jensen, Dr. Woodward has a question.
Yeah, the live links, can we get a copy of the slides that would have the links in them? We got the printed version.
The PowerPoint.
The PowerPoint. Actually, you've sent those
I
out
have sent them both by email and they are posted on the website.
with the live links in them.
Indeed.
Great, thank you.
Yes, and if you go to fda.gov and just simply type in the search bar biosimilars, this will also lead you to much of the same education that's linked.
Thank you.
So just as a brief overview, Mayo Clinic has 3 major destination medical sites. So we have a location in Rochester, Minnesota, in Phoenix, Arizona, as well as, oh my gosh, blanking on Jacksonville, Florida, sorry. And then we have several smaller health system sites in both Minnesota and Wisconsin. So we span multiple states, and that will kind of, I'll lead into that with our presentation as well. So our biosimilar strategy was that we were committed to lowering the overall cost of care for classes of drugs that had biosimilars. We declared a biosimilar drugs therapeutically equivalent to their innovator or reference product once they became available in the market. We then contracted for a preferred agent, whether that was the biosimilar or the reference product for our Mayo Clinic enterprise, again, all of our locations, with the focus on the lowest net cost product. We had to make biosimilars available in our clinics and infusion centers for insurance plans that mandated specific products. Again, remember, we are a multi-state institution, so we have different payers at different locations that might be mandating specific biosimilar products that might not have been our preferred product. And we really wanted to develop a streamlined process for providers through therapeutic substitution. So the key takeaway here is that Mayo Clinic has treated biosimilars like generics, but developed pathways to optimize their use.
Dr. Jensen?
Yes.
Senator.
Thank you. Is the Mayo Clinic, these biosimilars, both covered under Part D Medicare and also the medical benefit? Are there different kinds of insurance at play here?
There are different types of insurance at play. So when we're talking about 2020, most of those products at that time would be on the medical benefit, so processed through the patient's medical benefit insurance. However, as time has evolved and where we are currently, as Representative Merchant mentioned, with adalimumab biosimilars and even some of the insulin biosimilars, we would see coverage of those on the patient's prescription benefit or Medicare Part D for Medicare.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Jensen, when you talk about the medical benefit versus the pharmacy benefit, I think under the medical benefit side, the institution has more control over what product gets utilized because it's on your internal formulary, gets billed on the medical benefit side. When you move over, not you personally, but Mayo moves over to the pharmacy side, the choice of the product and coverage is now controlled by the PBM or by the insurance company, not by the institution.
That is correct. However, I would say on the medical benefit, we still have to undergo prior authorization for many of our commercial payers. So there still could be commercial insurers saying, no, I do not cover a biosimilar. My patient needs to remain on the reference product. Or we'll see payers say, no, we don't cover that biosimilar. You need to use this biosimilar. So we do see payer preference on the medical benefit, which does hinder our ability to drive use towards our lowest net cost product. But I would say it is more common in the pharmacy benefit space or the outpatient prescription space where we know we have a lot of PBMs at play here that you probably are seeing more mandating for specific products. I would say that's probably a true trend.
Dr. Sherman? Question?
Yeah, just quick question. When you find that you have a lower cost product that's a biosimilar, are you able to negotiate or have a discussion with the insurer to make the argument that they will actually have lower cost with that? Or are they pretty adamant that they want their product?
They are usually very adamant they want their product, and I will cover this in a later slide. I will say we've talked to our teams internally saying, can we contract with this payer to say we need to get, why do they not cover our preferred drug? But that is just a lot of work to negotiate down to the specific drug level, where our kind of negotiating with our payers is more high level of which services are going to be covered, which locations are going to be covered. So they are, what we have heard from our contracting team is they just do not typically contract with insurers down to the drug level. But would I love to get there? I really would love to get there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So therapeutic substitution. Within a U.S. healthcare system, the Pharmacy and Therapeutics, or P&T committee, may declare drugs therapeutically equivalent. This means that the same therapeutic or pharmacologic class is expected to have similar outcomes or adverse effects. This gives pharmacists the permission to change out drugs based upon predefined protocols and allows an institution to select a preferred product. The pharmacy is then authorized to change the preferred product without the provider consent when a non-preferred product is ordered. However, this is dependent on state pharmacy laws. So fortunately for the states that we operate, we are allowed to do therapeutic substitution with biosimilars because that's allowed on our state board of pharmacies. So our biosimilar experience was that we implemented this program for oncology drugs in September of 2020 with biosimilars as our preferred products. After 1 year, we moved from using over 90% of that reference biologics to over 80% of biosimilar products. We did not have any adverse clinical patient outcomes reported. Our physicians and patients were highly receptive to using biosimilars. And for these 5 medication classes, we reduced our drug expenses by 23.1 million, or a 24.3% expense reduction. And select medication costs from innovator to biosimilars also decreased by 75% or more because of biosimilar competition in the market. And our publication is linked here as well, if you would like to access it. This is just another graphic showing our year 1 versus our year 2 post biosimilar implementation. And what I would like to drive home here is that we did actually increase our utilization, meaning we actually purchased more drug product for most of these classes, with the exception of possibly rituximab and trastuzumab, where we had a slight utilization decrease, so maybe less patients treated in that time frame with those products. But we still saw very impressive expense reductions. And I want to highlight for trastuzumab and for pegfilgrastim and for rituximab, you can see those very large expense reductions because those categories of drugs have more than one biosimilar. They have multiple biosimilars in the market, which is bringing those prices down because they're trying to compete with each other and maintain their own market share.
Dr. Jensen, just maybe it's going to state the obvious, but it appeared to be that even though utilization went up on the products, the overall cost went down.
That is correct, meaning we could purchase more, we could treat more patients and still see that expense reduction because we're using less costly agents.
This is the expense to Mayo, not the expense to the insurance company.
Correct, but our expense to, yes, but theoretically, because our percent of what we charge out is based on what our cost is, these were lower costs, lower charges to the insurance company. And if you assume that a patients pay a percentage of that, also lower costs to patients through co-insurance and co-pays.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. This is just showing for the classes of drugs, including bevacizumab, filgrastim, epoetin, pegfilgrastim, prefilled syringe, rituximab, and trastuzumab. Before we implemented biosimilars, we spent $107 billion on these products. In the year 1 post-implementation, we went down to $82.8 million. And now at year 2 post-implementation, we went down to just over $72 million. So looking from baseline to year 2, we've saved $35.2 million across these classes of medications. Now we'll kind of transition to some barriers to biosimilar adoption and what the reimbursement landscape looks like. Some barriers that we see as a health system are payer preferences. Like I said, if we want to use our preferred product, which we know is the lowest net cost to patients, but yet a payer is saying, no, you need to use something else, that is a barrier. We have legal and regulatory issues. So patent protections is one that I already mentioned, with a biosimilar having a skinny label compared to that reference product. And sometimes regulatory issues will just slow biosimilars coming to the market in general. Biosimilars have separate healthcare common procedural coding system codes, or HCPCS codes, and therefore they also have separate average selling prices. So that also is a barrier to using or to adopting them. You have to come up with a creative solution of how to use these within your system through therapeutic substitution.
Dr. Jensen, in regards to the payer preference, if I go back there for a second, if the way a product is priced out from Mayo is based upon your cost, if all of a sudden you have to use a payer preferred product, which is a higher cost than what you have internally, would that mean that the charge to the patient, to the insurance company, would be higher because you're coming off a higher cost? Therefore, if they have a 20% copay, they're paying more as well?
That is correct. And I do have a slide to cover that as well. So again, some barriers to rapid adoption, the clinical issues, explaining to providers that that approval package is mostly going to be based on that analytical data and very few clinical studies. That is a paradigm shift that we have to discuss with our providers. Like I mentioned before, those legal and regulatory issues such as patent protections, lawsuits, and injunctions hinder biosimilars coming to the market. And then we have financial and policy issues, including pricing and rebates, and then facility and payer policies. So, and what I mean by this is sometimes we might see a payer say, well, we won't reimburse you if you treat them in a hospital-based outpatient. You need to treat them in a clinic-based outpatient. So that's some other payer policy barriers that a health system might incur. US payers really are driving decisions. They are selecting preferred products. There's really an unrealized impact given our acquisition costs versus those rebate opportunities. At times, this might not be the lowest cost to the health system or the lowest total cost of care product. If there is a rebate the insurance company gets, the patient still usually pays the higher cost. So this goes back to your question, Representative Merchant, that let's say we have to use a higher cost product. Our charge is $10,000, patient paying 20% may pay $2,000 out of pocket. Well, their insurance company likely is driving towards that higher cost product because they're getting a rebate on the back end. And a vast majority of the time, that's probably not being shared with the patient. Sometimes we'll say, well, if we drive towards our lowest net cost product towards a rebate, maybe we're going to have lower premiums in the following year, but still that patient's out of pocket at that time they're not being helped if there's a rebate on the back end that's driving that payer's decision to use the higher cost product. Again, our providers really, and our pharmacists in this case, must select the product based upon the patient's insurance coverage. We need to use what's covered by the patient's insurance. We do not want them to end up with an inordinately high bill. Pharmacies are concerned for safety issues due to the need to carry multiple products. These are all very much so look-alike, sound-alike drugs that sound very similar. And there also are space demands for carrying different inventories, which is a barrier. This is kind of explaining that payer demand. I will say that blue, it means that a payer is kind of only covering biosimilars. Green means that they're covering both biosimilars and reference products. And then red means they're actually preferring only reference products. So you can see that there's really a variety of what payers are doing. And the lack of consistency in PBM coverage really creates issues for pharmacists and providers because you can never keep track to know, oh, well, this payer is covering this one and that payer is covering this one. It gets very confusing and very complicated.
Dr. Jensen, I think also, is that subject to the change on the calendar year? Because once you change from one insurance to another one, which changes the formula, that could change on an annual basis.
Correct. So usually if the patient changes insurance, we have to get a new prior authorization from their new insurance. And that might say, yes, that product's still covered, or they might say, nope, we need to switch to X product. So yes. This just demonstrates that refrigerator space is a precious commodity. Some of these are stored room temperature. Shelf space is also a commodity. Current inventory requirements require us to stock multiple products, which again causes confusion. But if we were to have a biosimilar parity, meaning that we're going to cover any biosimilar at parity and that institution can drive towards that lowest net cost product, then we don't have as much inventory burden and we can really streamline the products that we carry. Biosimilars are each assigned their own unique HCPCS or J code, as I mentioned. They each have their own average selling price. Most biosimilars right now are not interchangeable, meaning that you need to have a mechanism in place to allow that. At our institution, that would be what I call that therapeutic substitution, where the pharmacist is allowed to interchange, and there's a cost for that. There's the labor cost for the pharmacist's time to do that. For reimbursement-wise, a reference product is reimbursed at the average selling price plus 6% of its own ASP. Whereas biosimilars, Medicare is trying to incentivize use of biosimilars. So as long as the biosimilars ASP is lower than that reference product, then the biosimilar will be reimbursed at ASP plus 8% of the reference product ASP. So they're trying to, again, incentivize use of biosimilars by reimbursing them a little bit better. So here we'll transition to some future opportunities for sustainability. State legislative considerations would be to potentially support biosimilar parity laws that allow healthcare systems to choose products that make financial sense. And again, if there was some concern that, well, what if the healthcare system is going to charge us more? We could also negotiate set reimbursement rates to make sure that both the insurance company and the healthcare institution have stake in the game to keep those prices low. State Medicaid plans should really eliminate rebate incentives and focus on set reimbursement rates that reduce all costs. And this would allow us to reduce inventory, potentially reduce prior authorization burden, and reduce electronic medical record burden. Because they have their own unique HCPCS code, unique ASP, each biosimilar will require a separate build record within a institution's medical record, and that requires maintenance as well. So the key takeaway here is to treat biosimilars as a commodity, which would force market competition and uptake. Congress considerations are to support the Biosimilar Red Tape Elimination Act, which would deem biosimilars interchangeable with reference products upon FDA approval. This would increase access to biosimilars and reduce costs associated with switching studies, which may drive increases in biosimilar costs. So again, if a manufacturer is required to do those switching studies and enroll patients in those trials, there are costs associated with those trials, which may then lead to higher list prices for biosimilars, which we do not want. We also want policy reform to reduce anti-competitive behaviors such as patent thickets, paragraph 4 settlement agreements, and evergreening. And now I'll transition to Representative Merchant to kind of discuss this slide and this strategy.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen. So when we think of the generic market and are trying to emulate that market on the biosimilar side, when you look at reimbursement for a generic product, they don't reimburse based on each generic product. They basically say, for that generic, this is the maximum allowable cost. And allow the pharmacists in the market to take care of where they're going to source it from and saying, okay, if you can get a maximum allowable cost of $10, if you can find it for 8 or 6, then it's to your benefit. But the maximum amount that we're going to allow under the plan, if you will, is $10, regardless of where you source it from. If you can't get it for $10 and you can get it for 12 because you can't buy effectively, then you're at a disadvantage. I think that strategy has some common sense to how we think about biosimilars, and saying the same thing with biosimilars, that we have a maximum allowable cost. Good example of this is Humira. Mark Cuban with his cost plus right now, there's a product on the market which is 85% less than Humira. But we don't price things based upon that. We price it based upon what the biosimilars are themselves. So a strategy we want to think about as a board is looking at a cost factor and saying, for Humira, regardless of what brand you use, we'll pay you $2,000. At that point in time, it levels the playing field, so everybody knows what the cost is going to be, and then allow the market at that point in time to be what it is, and allow for market competition to say, okay, the 2,000 is the maximum amount that I can get reimbursed. If I can buy it at $1,500, then it's to my advantage. If I can't buy it at $1,500 and I have to use the brand name for whatever reason, it costs $3,000, I'm at a disadvantage. But it's looking at the market competition, saying, like you did with generics, let the pharmacy source it and say, this is what we're going to charge, or what we allow for a maximum cost. That's one of the strategies for us to think about as a board. As we can't set the cost, but we can make recommendations to the public payers saying, based upon the information in the marketplace, we think this is a reasonable price or reasonable cost that you should reimburse the pharmacy for, or the insurance company we want to look at it. That's kind of the strategy that I wanted to talk to the board, not so much today, but set foundation for a future discussion. Is that an opportunity for us to sit there and say in the biosimilars? Because the more we can move from the innovative product, which is the list product, to a biosimilar, and take advantage of that 20 and 30% discount, the more we can save our public payers, which goes back to the taxpayer. Dr. Chairman?
Just, when you talked about, I think it was $23 million worth of savings, how many patients were a part of that savings? I mean, what was your total number of patients across your system that participated in that?
We did not do unique patient count, but again, seeing that we went to over 80% biosimilar use in all those categories, thereby we can assume that over 80% of our patients were transitioned to a biosimilar during that time frame.
And your number of patients, just roughly, do you know what that would be?
It's hundreds of patients.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was across our whole enterprise.
I mean, it was thousands of doses, hundreds of patients.
I'm just thinking how that would extrapolate to us, but maybe we can't. Anyway.
But, correct, so it's a good point as far as trying to understand the benefit that we could achieve. And I think part of the strategies here and looking at it and saying is that instead of us trying to go at it drug by drug by drug, is look at it and saying, this is a class of drugs or biosimilars. Is that we look at the class and we say, okay, these drugs are basically safe and efficacious. And if you look at the European market, they're saying they're interchangeable. Should we not, at that point in time, create an environment to encourage market competition, saying, based upon the drugs in the market that are biosimilars, they're going from this price, $50 all the way to $1,000. I'm just exaggerating here. Why are we allowing somebody to reimburse regardless of the drug at 500 if you can buy it at 50? Should we not go back and look at it and saying, we think a reasonable price, the maximum allowable cost is going to be 150. And let the market sort itself out to determine which biosimilar gets utilized versus getting into the micro, what do they call the detail? Any thoughts on that? Jason?
I'd like to learn more about the interchangeability part. I think that kind of brushed over a little bit, but I want to know how clinically meaningful is defined, no clinically meaningful differences. I think with under the specific context of the insulins and the biosimilars in the insulin market, there's a lot of movement across the different biosimilars because there's a lot of clinical thought that they're not actually identical or not as similar. And so just the use of that term biosimilar.
Right.
And I saw a slide that, you know, the Mayo Clinic sees biologics and biosimilars as they do small molecule drugs and generics. But I'm not sure, I'm at odds with that statement, and I'd like more clarity on that. Looking at what you had mentioned earlier, Representative Merchant, about how biologics are proteins, and they usually have these amino acid shuttles, and there's well-known and well-equivocated inter-individual variations in amino acid metabolism that I think affects that concept of clinical, you know, identical clinical effect. And so I'd like to hear more about that, because it feels like with Humira, the example you brought up several times, that might be one of the factors that's impeding uptake of the biosimilar in the Humira market. That's tried and true. We hear that term a lot. So I'd like to hear more about the clinical no clinically meaningful differences, because it's not been my experience in the insulin market.
Doctor, thank you for that. It's important to understand that.
Yes,
Would
I
you
would
have
think
Good, Dr. Johnson.
sorry about that. I would just say that one thing that we've talked about too is we have to remember, because these are biologic medications, even a reference product, it's not the same product. That it is, you know, you can almost consider a different lot or a different batch of that reference product to almost be a biosimilar to itself, because these are biologic medications that are large protein structures that change. So that's just one thing I wanted to kind of point out there. Dr. Tishy, do you have anything else to add on as far as interchangeability? Or those questions?
You know, I think the best way to think of it is a lot of these changes that we're making, they're, you know, one patient was on one version of a product and they switched to another version of the product, and they, you know, are not having any changes in their clinical outcomes, not having adverse reactions to the products themselves. You know, if you check, you know, if you study enough patients, eventually you probably find, you know, someone that has some sort of difference, but we're not seeing any meaningful difference. And a lot of the sort of what's occurring is it's really the payers sort of driving. It's really more of a financial decision anyway, and we're not seeing those clinical issues occur when we switch patients between products.
Dr. Chairman?
One thing that you're not, my guess is that you're not switching products in a vacuum. You're switching products with the same level or even maybe a heightened level of monitoring. For example, with insulin, monitoring blood glucose and AccuChecks and all the, or if you have an implanted monitoring device. So it's one, I mean, that's just standard of practice. So you're not going to, even if it's the, as you mentioned, even if it's the exact same product, but a different lot number, you're still monitoring just as closely the impact on the patient, which is how you avoid adverse clinical outcomes. You may have to adjust the dose of whatever product you're using, depending on the response of the patient. So what I'm getting at is that the way you avoid adverse clinical outcomes is to continue the same level of standard of practice monitoring that you would have had all along. And certainly I'm a GI doc, and we did that when we would substitute Humira or Remicade. It was just part of what we did. And I think that's the way, just in applying that standard practice is the way that you avoid adverse clinical outcomes when you're using any of these medications. It's not like they're used with no monitoring. And I think that's important to understand. Whatever insulin product you are using, you are still monitoring the patient just as closely as you did previously.
And
Yes.
I would say that when we made these changes, we had heightened monitoring because, you know, we had concern that there could be differences. So I think the point is these are highly monitored drugs already. When we
Right.
made transitions, we monitored them even more closely because we were very vigilant for any changes that could occur. And even with generic oral solid drugs that have narrow therapeutic windows, we would follow those closely when we switch from brand to generic or between generic products. So I think
Right.
the point
So
is
what you're
that these are closely monitored drug therapies.
right. So what you're saying is that, you know, you may have to adjust the dose a little bit. You may have to, but to respond to Dr. Aziz, these are not changed in a vacuum. They are changed in the same clinical setting that you were applying the original medication in the first place, biologic in the first place.
Right, so we use them in the exact same ways, so that expected monitoring would occur the exact same way as well. It would be inappropriate if we switched to a biosimilar and stopped monitoring the patient, because that just wouldn't be safe in general based on how the drug is used.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So go back to the slide here on the screen. I would like the board to, in a future meeting, talk about a strategy, which is part of what we're driven by, is it possible to think about a maximum allowable cost for biosimilars? Comparable to what we do in the generic market. I'd like to have a future discussion about that, maybe bring some people back, talk about the pros and cons of what this means. But it allows us as a board to come up with a strategy to bring down overall drug costs. If we can bring down the biosimilars by 20%, even 15%, when you're talking about 50% of the drug spend is in biosimilars, then we can bring that spend down. You know, 5 or 7, 8% decrease in drug costs to the plan is a major impact. When you talk about the millions of dollars we spent throughout the state from Medicaid, our own employees, public payers, and possibly even the commercials. We could be setting that kind of an example. So if it's okay with the board, I'd like to tee this up for a future conversation. Is that agreeable?
I'm interested in advancing my understanding about that form of reference pricing, as there was a bill last year on the House floor relative to MAC pricing.
Correct. And correct. Same concept. All right, so that's basically the maximum allowable cost. Do you have anything you want to add to this slide that I did not cover, or something that would help us in a future discussion by this board that you'd like to bring up at this point in time? Dr. Jensen?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah, I think you covered it well. I don't have anything else to add. Okay. Next, we'll kind of talk about what a formulary committee structure and function is, potentially for New Hampshire to create a state committee. The function of a formulary committee is to review medications based on safety and efficacy first, and then financial and budgetary impacts second. You want to leverage that collective clinical knowledge, your FDA resources, and select preferred agents. Membership should include physician and pharmacy representatives. You want to also have a finance representative, and then your board of pharmacy involvement for implementation to ensure you can be in accordance with state laws. So in conclusion, the promise of biosimilars is being realized for most disease states. The market is expanding. We are seeing cost reduction. However, there's still work to be done to ensure continued growth and sustainability to ensure that we continue to see expenditure reduction in the future.
Dr. Chairman?
Yeah. Just two questions, Dr. Jensen. One is, have any states actually implemented a formulary committee?
To my knowledge, I do not know. None that I know of.
So,
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
if I can answer that question. So, I used to live in Connecticut, and Connecticut does have a state Medicaid P&T, and I testified before that committee for other drug-related issues previously.
And the other question was, have any states regulated the ability of insurance companies, the carriers, to be able to take rebates but not pass that cost savings on to the patient?
I would say, to my knowledge, not that I know of, but this is why there's a lot of PBM reform and a lot of focus in this area. That would be what I have to add. Dr. Tichy, do you have anything else to add or know anymore?
I don't have a specific example that I can provide. I think that's something we could look at and get back to you with.
Thank you, Dr. Senator Rosenwald.
It's a question really for you. We have a Medicaid formulary committee, right?
It's a DUR.
Yeah.
What's interesting, when I talk to the people in Medicaid, the DUR can make a recommendation to what's interchangeable, but there's no state law that allows it to occur, because when you get into the state, there's no legal state law to allow for the interchangeability on the biosimilars unless the state law allows for it. They can make a recommendation, but that's as far as it can go.
My second question isn't our charge to work on behalf of the public payers, not the patients?
Right.
So we wouldn't want to be necessarily reducing costs to the patient. Our first goal is reduce the cost to Medicaid and the public and the state employees, I guess, and retirees.
And we also can only make recommendations.
Right, but we wouldn't be advocating to pass rebates to consumers, because that would make the cost higher for the plan.
Senator Rosenwald, you are asking a very insightful question. When you talk about drug affordability.
Who's it affordable for?
Who's it affordable? Yes. Is it for the plan? Is it for the state? Is it for the patient? I mean, that's probably another conversation we tee up and saying, where is our mission? Is it really, is it the patient? Is the plan? Is it? I think it's something we should get clarification amongst all of us on the board, is what is that definition of affordability, Dr. Esses? Sorry.
So thank you, Doctors Jensen and Tichy, for that informative presentation. I learned much. Do you have anything to say about failure rates with these endeavors to match up biosimilars to biologics? Presumably, there's been situations where they haven't had any clinical effect, or maybe more adverse drug events or otherwise. But I've not heard that. I get the sense that 100% of the times they've been compared, they work and they're always cheaper. But is that actually necessarily true? And if not, can you give any examples of how a biosimilar has not kind of matched the clinical efficacy of its reference product counterpart?
I would say, based on what I have seen, that the FDA would would essentially not approve that drug. Let's say there was something going on with the manufacturing facility that they had a question on certain things, and they would go back to the manufacturer to say, you need to fix this before we're going to approve your product. We've seen that. But like I said, with those emerging switching studies, and there's a lot of evidence out there that, again, we've implemented biosimilars, we're not seeing any adverse outcomes. We're seeing that same safety and efficacy as we would with a reference product. So for the products that are in the market, I don't think that's out there, not in the literature that I have seen.
So turning that question around, when you are not able to actually make a switch with a patient, what are the reasons why, other than the insurance carrier won't allow it? What are the other reasons? Are there any other reasons that you can't make that switch long term? I would say there is something called the nocebo effect, where you do need to counsel these patients, especially, in the GI space. These patients, maybe they failed multiple therapies and they finally got to their Remicade and they are so excited to stick with their Remicade. And you better have a conversation with them, because if you change it, you want them to understand, listen, this is a lower cost product that we don't expect you to have any safety or efficacy difference. For the infliximab class in general, we didn't do the pharmacist-driven therapeutic interchange because we wanted that provider and patient discussion to occur so that the patient was aware and they were on board with it, because we didn't want to have this nocebo effect and say, we used a different product and now I'm not feeling as well, because the patient wasn't informed of that in advance. So that's one area that we've really pushed to have that patient provider conversation. And if the patient wasn't comfortable and the insurance did continue to cover the reference product, then we kept them on the reference product. So that has occurred. And I would say that might be what's also occurring in the adalimumab space or the Humira space. Patients are used to citrate free. Now we have some biosimilars coming out citrate free if the insurance product, carrier covers that. But, having to counsel a patient saying, I'm sorry, your insurance company changed and now you're going from a citrate free to a non-citrate free. And we're not going to expect any safety or efficacy difference, but there might be more sting because it does have the, unfortunately, it has citrate in it. So you might see the sting, but we don't anticipate that safety or efficacy difference. So I think there is still a lot of power in having our physicians and having providers educate patients about this to make sure there's that shared decision making.
If I could also go back to Dr. Haz's comment about products. Also, the same thing happens in generics. You give an example. When you have a generic product, there's more in the product than just the active chemical. You have fillers, you have binders, you have dyes, you have all kinds of things. And there are times in which a patient may have an allergy to a red dye or to a blue dye, and therefore cannot take generic brand A, but can take B, because the way the binders and fillers are used, because there's no regulation upon what those are. It's only the active chemical. So how it acts, if you will, dissolves and so forth. It does have to pass the FDA approval process, but what you use for a binder and a filler and so forth is not regulated that. So there are times in which a patient will run into an issue with a particular product because of the fillers and binders and so forth. It has nothing to do with the active chemical. So therefore, even in the generic market, we do see some of that as well.
Interesting.
Okay, so again, it's something that it happens, it's not common, but you have to be sensitive to it. That when all of a sudden a patient comes back and says, I can't tolerate the product for whatever reason. Okay.
So is the citrate in Humira, is that considered an active ingredient or not?
No,
Just hurts.
just hurts.
It's an owie.
Yeah. So Dr. Jensen, the thing, again, I think that's helpful to understand is that when you look at the generics, we think of them as being truly interchangeable without any kind of onward effect. In reality, there could be times in which it would occur. The same thing, I think Dr. Tishy talked about the issue of drugs with a narrow therapeutic index. A good classical one is phenytoin, and people go from Dilantin to a generic drug. And at that point in time, it's being sure the provider is aware of the fact they're making a substitution so that they can monitor sometimes the blood level. The patient's monitoring for either toxicity or from something that's therapeutic below. So there are things that happen even in the generic side that we have to be cognitive of as much as we do on the biosimilar side.
Great.
Yeah, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I think you've left at least myself with some really good points to consider. And I think one of the things I'd like to back to the board and talk about is what's the strategies we can use from this information that we have gained today to try to help the public payers, because based upon that, our overall mission is to bring down drug costs. However, Dr. Senator Rosenwald brought up a good question. Cost to whom? Is it affordability to the plan? Is it affordability to the patient? Is it affordability to whom? And I think that's probably another conversation the board should have, is it really identify affordability, who we really focus our attention on.
And
Any
the
more?
last thing I would just add about the affordability on that point, Representative Merchant, is that, you know, we know copay assistance. I heard kind of a talk about copay maximate or the current legislation going on, you know, having that manufacturer assistance count towards the patient's out of pocket and those changes. But I will just say that a lot of the biosimilars do have patient assistance programs, just like reference products. So just be aware that there is patient assistance programs available in both spaces.
I know we didn't talk about this, but one of the things that will be coming up in the meeting in January, and I've had presentation from the PCMA for the PBM side of the equation, because one of the questions I've asked them is that when you move from the medical side to the pharmacy side, it can impact the patient's copays, and try to understand how that evolves. But also, if I understand it correctly, on the institution side, you're wrestling with the fact of the inventory and the impact it has on carrying multiple products. That would say that that probably would transcend not just from a hospital, could go into a community pharmacy, where all of a sudden you could have a situation where in order to take care of the patient's needs, you may have to stock multiple versions of the same product, which you would not do in a generic market. You only have one or two generics in your pharmacy. You wouldn't carry every possible generic under the sun. So in saying that, do you see any kind of an impact on the institution with the PBMs become more involved in the pharmacy benefit side as they move from the medical side to the pharmacy side? How did that impact your operations and impact the patients and so forth? It wasn't on the slide today, but can you briefly talk about how the pharmacy within Mayo deals with some of those operational issues and how the patients deal with some of the copay issues?
I don't have as much involvement on the outpatient side, but I can say that, you know, we have our mail order pharmacy is probably one of our biggest ones, as well as our specialty pharmacy. So we're able to have a little bit more, we have more square footage there where we can stock more products versus, like, let's say one of our walk-up Subway pharmacies, they probably are only working with a very small refrigerator. So they probably are just stocking maybe very few select products, but otherwise we might be turfing our patients as much as we can to more of a mail order or our larger specialty pharmacy where we do have more storage for a larger inventory.
Thank you,
Or
Dr.
there might
Wood.
be a delay too if we have to order in the drug. Unfortunately, if we don't have it in stock because we couldn't fit it or whatever reason, then the patient might have to return the next day to get the product, or we might have to mail it to them at home.
Thank you, Dr. Wood.
So the savings that you've published are savings with respect to what Mayo paid the pharmaceutical companies for the drugs it provided, right? So there's no internal cost savings of operations that is included in that. So for example, if you found yourself having to stock or you threw away, stock less or you threw away less, that would not be represented in the numbers that you report.
No, that would not be reported in there.
Is there any effort to try and capture that information?
Go ahead, Dr. Tishy, if you have something to add.
We have not made an effort to capture that. We do know that we have to carry more inventory now that we have more options. So from an operational standpoint, it's actually become more costly and more complicated. But we have not put like a dollar value on that.
that would be useful, because to some extent you're offsetting if you say it's more expensive, you are now offsetting the cost savings to the drugs that were provided by the cost incurred by having to throw more drugs away that expired.
I would say as an institution, we do a really nice job of checking inventory and ensuring that we use it or return it in a timely manner, so that nothing does get or we expire out as little inventory as possible, especially with these biologic medications. These are high mover medications. We are using them very frequently in our oncology clinics. So it's monitored very closely, just because it is, you do not want to waste a $10,000 drug. You really want to be monitoring that inventory closely. So there's a lot more versus a generic drug where, okay, if we might not need to monitor that low cost inventory as much, because it's, again, way lower cost, less sensitivity there. I would say that's true, but that's why I mentioned earlier that without these drugs being interchangeable, we have to come up with mechanisms such as therapeutic interchange, and there is a cost to that, and it's just difficult to quantify what that is. We've removed providers from it by having simply the prior authorization team communicating to our frontline pharmacist of what product is covered, and they're making that change, so it's less FTE intensive versus if the provider was in the middle of that and we had to stop them from clinical work and have them use that time. So we've thought of less costly alternatives, but we can't use a pharmacy technician to do this work at this time, again, due to state board of pharmacy laws. If these were deemed interchangeable by the FDA, then it would be an automatic substitution. They also might be assigned the same HCPCS codes, not require those separate EMR builds, and it'd just be much more streamlined and reduce some of that operational burden.
Thank you.
So going back to the providers, the ones that write the prescription, the drug order, what are some of the residual issues that you have in Mayo that's still a barrier to as much of an uptake with the biosimilar adoption that you would like to achieve? If I understand it correctly, that you had 80% utilization of biosimilar, which means it's still 20% not being utilized. So why is it not going to 100%? What's the residual 20%? What's causing the barrier to that uptake?
The payer mix. So again, where we see payers who are still either mandating a reference product or maybe covering at parity, and we haven't simply updated that plan in a timely manner. There are burdens too. So like I said, a patient, we've been using the same order for the reference product. Well, when we built biosimilars, we had to build them differently. So we had to educate our providers. You need to, don't just discontinue reorder that old pathway. You need to stop that one. You need to search for the biosimilars and now apply this new plan that will contain our biosimilar drugs to the patient so that we're accessing the correct plan. So that was a barrier off the bat that kind of we're like, why aren't we seeing this adoption? Why are we not doing this? So we had to go back and educate, don't discontinue reorder. You need to stop that one, search, and order the new pathway.
Thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Jensen and Dr. Tishy. Sorry, I'll give you a hard. Sorry about that. I want to say thank you for taking the time this morning to help educate us. It's well done. Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
So good luck with everything you're doing at Mayo. Sounds like you're on a great track and got a great future ahead of you folks.
We also would love an update
Yeah.
Yes.
down the road.
Down the road. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're hoping to publish more. So we will definitely pass that along to Representative Merchant as those come along. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
I may call on both of you as my bill works its way through the House to dealing with the interchangeability between the products that are truly FDA interchange to allow the interchange between the interchangeable products. So I may call on you for any kind of testimony if you can possibly do that as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
He's a fellow.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I got texted earlier that the bill number for Senator Innes is Senate Bill 354.
354.
And that has to do with co-pays and patient assistance programs.
That's the bill, not the
That's the-
LSR.
No, it's a bill number.
So in regards to the agenda, we did briefly talk about legislative update before you got here, Dr. Sherman.
Oh.
But if you want to talk about the,
Sure. We had, you may remember Representative Edwards put in a bill,
Thank you for being here.
and I had promised to go through it. So really briefly, it's LSR 2648. The original LSR that he filed. He stated at this meeting last time that he was going to get rid of all of the changes that, this is all about conflicts of interest. He was going to get rid of all the changes covered under, I guess it's lines 1. It was all about the cohabitating partner. He felt like that wasn't necessary. And then I said I would go back and look at what the remainder of the balance of the bill, which started with the line 13, which is Roman 2. If you ignore the part that talks about a person for whom they are cohabitating, what I found in looking at this version from OLS was that it was super redundant with what was already in statute. The new part really comes in with Roman numeral 3. And so, and I have these changes. If anybody, I can send it, the digital copy to you. There's really 3 digital files. There's one, the original LSR. Second one is all of my marked up LSR. And then the third one is a clean copy. So we always like brief. This is all it is, the clean copy. And extracting from this what wasn't currently in statute. But if you remember, Representative Edwards was hoping to actually make sure that there was a mechanism for replacing somebody who had a conflict of interest. So I put that in as Roman 3, and what I basically did was to say the entity that replaces the board member or the staff or the advisory council member is the same entity that originally appointed them, which is much more consistent with what we do in statute. So if I had a conflict and I needed to be replaced, then it would be the president of the Senate replacing me. Rather than in his original bill, he had the executive council doing everything, which doesn't really work. So, or at least I don't know of any precedent for that. So that's what this does. And I had a discussion with Representative Edwards about it. He sounded agreeable. I sent him all the information. I haven't heard back. I think he's traveling.
He is traveling.
So this is hopefully something not only that accomplishes what he originally wanted to accomplish, simplified, following precedent, and would be something we can all support. And that's where I would, and I certainly support this new language. I think it's probably not perfect. It hasn't gone through OLS. It's just gone through Sherman. So Sherman TMS, not OLS. So that's why I sent it to him. And if you like, I can send it to Nancy and then she can disseminate it. But I think this works, and certainly Senator Rosenwald, Representative Merchant, and the department may want to look at it and see what they think.
well, thank you. Dr. Sherman. And then is there any questions about that from Dr. Sherman before I move on? Update, Executive Director, Mr. Barrett.
So not a lot of information, but exciting information. So this Wednesday at DNC, the executive director position will be heard. The individual has been given their offer letter with approval from GNC, then we will be able to start onboarding the employees as soon as possible. It is on the regular agenda. I did notice though, just for information. And that's all I have. Yeah, awesome.
Things are
Thank you.
moving forward positively
Yes.
in their, the usual.
State speak.
Within state ways.
Yeah, this is the last big hurdle.
Thank you.
Thank you for the update. Okay, on to the advisory council update. I did ask Dr. Sherman to speak about the advisory council. He's been
Right.
kind enough to coordinate that and get the council up and running.
So, barring any objections from the body, what I'd like to do, and an objection from you. I would like, well, basically what we need to do is we need to reach out to all of the entities that would be on the advisory council. Inform them of the statute, inform them of the goals of the advisory council, which are in the statute. And then ask them to either serve or have a designee and identify that person. And Representative Merchant and I were talking about, it might be helpful to have one of us as a liaison to the council, not in a formal way, because there's no position, but at least at their first meeting to explain, answer any questions and be in. And I'm happy to do that if, with the blessing of the board. But it's not a formal, there's no real role. It might be something we think about for future legislation, is having a non-voting liaison from the board on there.
Would those meetings be open to the public? That is, could other board members attend? What's the thought about that?
I think that's covered. I don't have the statute in front of me, but bottom line is it is open to the public, and they're not, as opposed to us, I believe they're not discussing proprietary information. So, we go into non-public to discuss that. So
I think what I see as the role of the advisory council is when we talk about a strategy, such as the maximum allowable cost for biosimilars, is going to the council and saying, what are your thoughts? I mean, providing us, if you will, a vehicle to think through some of the strategies we want to consider, the pros, the cons, and so forth, and based upon their advice, come back to the board with some sort of recommendation, and whether it's logical, what they see as positive, negative, and so forth, help advise the council on that strategy.
I agree that, the concept of MAC pricing is complex, and I think the board could use that a good set of guidance and information on that and other topics.
Although, to your point, Dr. Sherman, there's nothing in the statute that deals with the relationship per se operationally between the council and the board. And I think one of the things is maybe the executive director could provide some of that as a possibility, but I think it's important we have some sort of a linkage between the two entities for communication reasons.
all right, so we could, I could make sure that one of us is attending, able to answer questions, or able to bring back questions from the council. I don't see them as meeting all that often, but more meeting when we have come up with recommendations. And before those recommendations are finalized, taking them to the council for consideration and feedback. If you look at the composition of the council, it's really administratively, it's a powerhouse. I mean, it really is a great group to be bouncing things off.
Attorney Fahey, did you hand up, please?
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi, Todd.
Good morning, everybody. should we consider perhaps, and I know it's going to be a large body, the advisory council, but should we consider a kickoff meeting, a joint kickoff meeting between this board and that council, that body? Because I think there has to be a lot of that body's work is going to be to inform the work that we do and fill in some gaps. So just a thought, or maybe it's not necessary, but certainly some meeting with that body and at least the new executive director. So that was my comment for what it's worth.
Thoughts? I think it's a good idea, but the other board members?
I think the two entities need to be tightly interwoven and on the same page, so that's a great suggestion. So I'm in agreement with that.
Dr.
My question, I'm totally supportive of at least one person serving as a liaison, and I would totally support of you're an obvious candidate for doing your willingness to do
Well,
so.
any of us.
Is much appreciated. But whether that's a minimum interchange or a serving, meaning was meant to be a maximum. I'm kind of curious. I like to listen and, you know, think of such meetings would be fun to sit in on, not as a participant, but more as a member of the public, just to see what's going on. And
Well, I think the more, can I respond? I think the more of us that are there.
Yeah.
The better. Because obviously each of us brings a different expertise and background and. So it may be that we may want to have our meetings be joint with them every time. Because they're not going to be meeting that often, but having us be there and available as a group, that might be the best way to do it. At least to get them organized, the idea was to have one person, someone from our group to sort of be there for their organizational meeting and getting them up to speed. But then once they are meeting and formally, it might be helpful to have all of it or as many of us as possible at that meeting.
I would hope that would at least be possible.
Yeah.
I think I like where we're going in that direction, Dr. Sherman, in the sense that it's the collective wisdom of all of us. And at that point in time is that look at the advisory council is more of an ad hoc. In other words, we have an issue that we need to resolve or work our way through. And having as much brain power around the table, part of that discussion, I think would be beneficial to everyone.
Right.
That's not a bad thought of having, again, but in the statute, the council is a separate entity in its own right, along with what we have with the board. So you need to go back and look at the statute, how much leeway we have about having joint meetings. I think we can, but I'd like to have one of the attorneys in the room.
Yeah.
Well, if it's open to the public,
Yeah,
that's the question.
there's no restriction on any of us attending.
we can attend, but we wouldn't be part of the conversation.
Correct.
So I'm looking at saying that
Unless
we
we're invited.
invited. So the question at that point in time is that something in statute that we can do, or is that something we can possibly tackle through rulemaking?
I mean, based on the statute, just kind of looking at it, kind of ad hoc here. I don't see any prohibition against having meetings jointly, because the purpose is to advise the board. I don't know if you do that through a joint meeting or carrier pigeon or however you do it.
I wouldn't recommend.
Yeah. So, that's open to interpretation as to how you advise the board, but I'm not seeing anything prohibiting that. I'm also not seeing anything that suggests the advisory council is confidential or not open to the public either. So I think you could have joint meetings. I can get a more fully developed opinion on that.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, just to be sure we don't. But we can absolutely attend
Yeah,
as far as the public.
so I guess in terms of the update, the idea is that it's time we get them engaged. At least structurally, and then, because hopefully we're going to have more formal recommendations coming out maybe in the spring, and it would be great to have them in place by then.
Yeah,
Thank you for doing that.
thank you for doing that. All right. Regards to future meetings and topics. The next meeting is January 29th. After that, they will be on the Monday of the month at 9:30. On the one for January 29th, I did talk to Mr. Berry about having PCMA, if he's still here.
I am,
You are. Are we still on for the 29th?
yes, sir, and Sam can confirm that as well. Yeah.
No, he's the one doing the talking.
No.
Oh.
A colleague of mine at PCMA will be joining us.
Okay, and you have the talking points that we talked about?
I believe so, but I think we'll get together ahead of time just to make sure everything is covered.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
And if you have a slide deck, if you want to send it to me, what I've done in the past with the other presenters is to go through the slide deck for two reasons. Be sure we're not running over something, tripping over something that I think would be problematic, and also be sure it's hitting the points we want to make.
Sure, great.
Okay. On the future meetings too, I did talk to an individual about, this is Dr. Woodward, I want to catch up with you as well. This is in your camp, I think, and also just starting with Dr. Ezes, is data analytics. Trina Gori is the person who runs, she's CEO of something called True Data RX. And they've worked with other states, they've worked with other plans and so forth, dealing with what they call comparative analysis. And what they basically, she's done through her data, is looking at the drugs themselves, looking at the efficacy, and looking at cost. And what she does at that point in time is
Getting at what you were talking about during the presentation.
looking at it and saying, if you got two products that are shown to be efficacious, but one's 10 times more expensive than the other one, why are we paying for 10 times more expensive? If the data shows that basically from the clinical point of view, they are identical or close to it, about efficacious, being effective, then why are we looking at the strategy? Why are we not trying to utilize the lower cost option as much as possible? So she'll bring some data to us, but before we get there, what I wanted to talk to both of you about, either offline or somewhere along the way, she would like to go into the all payer data claim. And I don't know whether they can access it or not, if it's public.
There's a public use data set and then there's a limited use data set.
Okay. So can I talk to someone here about the public use data set? Because what she'd like to do is take some of her own data and analyze it. And then bring back to us what she found in the data. What she's trying to get to is in our own database, if we have products that are comparable from efficacy point of view,
Right.
but have a difference in cost. Why is one being utilized more, if it's more expensive than the lower cost option?
Or just she's trying to find the cost, given equal efficacy, why is it, there are observed cost differences?
Yes.
And then ask why, right? The database isn't going to provide an answer, but I worry that the data that she would have access to is not, would not support that. She needs the raw data.
Well, that'll be our job to ensure the fidelity of our analysis matches with the construct validity and think so.
Yeah, but I mean, I have had trouble getting analyses done.
Yeah. So
And she,
Yeah,
in
we'll
order,
talk about that.
yes,
what I'd like to do, and the attorneys here, if they talk to Katrina, it's a Catalina. That wouldn't be a quorum, right? So we're all set. I mean, if I join the two of them, then we have a quorum.
Who's Catalina again?
She's the one's the CEO of something called True Data RX.
I think if there's a public meeting, there's a quorum.
Right.
So, if there's two, I don't think it's a quorum.
Okay.
So I think you're okay, but again, I should get a better opinion about that.
Is there any way that we can have the two of them and myself along with Catalina on the same?
Can we do a subcommittee or something like that? Are we allowed
Can you
to?
do a subcommittee?
Good point.
It's not in your statute, but that would defer to.
It would have to be publicly noticed and have public access, right?
Yeah, if you're gonna do it, if it's gonna be something that involves a potential forum, yeah, but that's something I should reach out to the AGs about, get a better opinion about that.
Would be helpful because of the small board. It's hard sometimes when you're trying to.
No, I understand.
navigate. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I'd be very cautious with that for sure.
So what I can do is send her your contact and Dr. Woodward's contact, and have the two of you work with her.
Yeah, I think I would point her to the CHIS data,
Yeah.
the website on how to access the public use data to do a claims analysis, and she might find it quite easy from that.
One thing I did come across is on the medical benefit side, when you have a HCPCS code or J codes, and you saw the NDC number, maybe part of the reason for that being there in the database is that sometimes the insurance companies require the NDC number because they want the rebate. Not because of the way it was paid, but they're trying to go back to the same thing as looking for the rebate on the product and trying to capture it that way.
You mind translating that into English?
Good.
Actually,
Thank
the crowd
you.
here understands. But if you could.
I'll ask Douglas.
So as part of the annual report, 2023 annual report, we did a section on biologics versus biosimilars and a small report on that. And so we did multiple claims analyses. And presumably, the approach to querying prescription drug expenditures in the pharmacy claims is using the NDC, whereas in the medical claims, using the HCPCS J codes or Q codes for some generics.
Right.
But there were a lot of, probably about 20% of the cases in the medical benefit side where we saw HCPCS J codes and NDC codes. My initial supposition was that was just an artifact of more vigilant, medical coding.
Or
I'm more naive and less cynical than some others, I guess. But I also thought of a litany of other possibilities why they would have both of them there. Yet Morgan and I made decisions as analysts to just pretty much censor the presence of the NDC because it didn't affect the analysis, as it was just centered around claims in the medical benefit. So at first we thought to use a proxy that might be white bagging or brown bagging going on. That they're infusion drugs that somebody got dispensed at a pharmacy and that's why they were there. But we ruled that out actually after kind of a more drilling down a little bit deeper.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting.
What ends up happening is that when it's billed on the medical side, if you don't have an NDC number and all you have is a J code or HCPCS code, it's hard for the paying the bill to identify it down to the drug level, which is what they need to go back to the manufacturer for a rebate.
So how do they solve that?
What they then require is that when it's being billed to the insurance plan on the medical side, they include the NDC number of what was used. And once they have the NDC number, they can go back to the manufacturer and say, see, they used your product. I want my rebate.
Which they promptly pass along to the patient.
Absolutely.
Just saying.
Just like that. So, so as far as it going down the road here, January 29th with PCMA being on the agenda to talk about some of the concerns to the white bag, and we talked about this issue of the patient copay, moving from the medical side to the pharmacy side, how does it impact that? We talked about the waste issues, a few other things we talked about, and I think PCMA wants to have a chance to respond to it. So I said, fine, it is logical. We're here for, we have a discussion and have a both sides presenting the case. Strategies going forward. Also, I want to keep people aware of what we have as far as our goals and the strategies. One of the strategies we talked about was the utilization of biosimilars. And we talked about the payment modifications as a possibility. I think goes right into the Mayo presentation today, talking about maximum allowable cost. Is it feasible? I don't know, but it's an interesting concept.
Can I just ask a question? So maximum allowable cost to whom? Are we talking to Medicaid, to the pharmacy, to the provider, Mayo Clinic,
It's going to be the maximum allowable cost, the way I understand it, to what the payer is going to pay the dispenser, which would be the pharmacy.
So this is not to the Mayo Clinic and not to the patient, but to the pharmacy.
Correct. Which is what we do now with generics. We come up with a maximum allowable cost. So the pharmacy says, okay, for aspirin, whatever it's going to be, we'll pay you $2 per 100 for a bottle of 100. And that's the maximum that will reimburse you.
We being
The plan.
well.
whoever's paying the pharmacy. It wouldn't be the patient because of it's cash paying.
As a public payer, you're talking largely about Medicaid, but they,
And the state.
the
state
state.
plans.
yes,
State plans.
but they're all not paying, they're on a capitation basis rather than a drug basis. Most of the prescription
Medicaid
benefits,
is,
yeah, that's what I'm
we're
saying.
not sure about the state plans.
Yeah, a lot of
Or
times,
private,
private
yeah.
pay, so forth, and whether it's capitated to what level, I don't know, that's a question maybe for, Mr. Lippman, to talk to them and how the RFP with the pharmacy benefit side, that part I don't know. You raise a good point, Dr. Wood, but I don't. It's kind of like the same thing happens inside of a hospital, we got a DRG.
Yeah,
It's kind of,
exactly.
the other thing too, as far as going forward, Dr. Ezra, if you could give us an update, not so much today, but in future board meetings, this redundancy report between the insurance department and the board, where we're going with that, what's happening. Just again, advise the board because it's supposed to be done in consultation with each other. So I know exactly, I haven't received any information from the insurance department about what we're doing with it.
I was hoping this fall to present on it. I thought, I know we had a full schedule of presenters, but I'd be happy to in the January meeting to present
Yeah.
on that, bring up
Okay.
some topics, and I do seek collaboration among other board members.
Okay. Thank you. One of the other things we talked about was creating a statewide purchasing co-op with the PBMs. I did talk to some folks in this space. What's interesting, I think either Catalina can do it or Antonio, either one, depending upon which day we're talking about it. But looking at what some states have done is the PBM world. You could create a quote, an RFP or looking at PBM. Some states have actually broken it apart. So you have the administrative part, which is processing claims. You have the formulary, and you have the network, which is the pharmacy itself. Right now, they may be all on the same PBM. There may be some logic, like the state of Connecticut is broken apart. So what is happening is the process of the company doing the claim processing is different than one running the formulary, which is different than running the network. To create again market dynamics to help at that point in time control the overall cost from an operational point of view. The other side of the coin is with the PBM. There's nothing to prevent the state wants to go down this road. Is that you can create the structure. It doesn't have to be limited strictly to public payers. That's our focus here. But once it's created, it's possible to then extend it to the private pay. They can, same thing we have with the insurance product with medical leave. The state has a plan. It's for the state employees, but other people can buy into it if they want it. So it's following that model that we created here in New Hampshire and saying, okay, we have a state basis or state core. It doesn't mean we have to limit it only to the core. There's no mandate. They can participate if they want to. Those are things for future for us to talk about. Teeing it up with speakers to come before the board to talk about some of the things they're doing that are innovative. That again, help us start talking about strategies to help bring down overall drug costs. And one of the things that Catalina talked about from True Data RX, when you talk about drug costs, and she hit the nail on the head, is so much focus on the drug price and not looking at cost. And what she said is that when you think about cost, price is only a component of it. There is the price of the product, there's the product utilized itself, and there's the utilization of the product. So all three of those lead to cost. If you only focus on price, which is not a focus at all, you're ignoring the other two. So the question at that point in time with biosimilars is that, are we using a drug that's cost effective, that doesn't give up efficacy? And that's part of the conversation is how do we strategically think about this? Is do we create a process in place? Let's go back to the advisory council and saying, based upon their knowledge, are we in fact using the right formula? Are we incentivizing people to use a low cost product? So those are things I'm trying to tee up for future board meetings, and that's where we're headed.
So one addition to that would be, if there an opportunity in one of the early meetings, January or not, for the executive director to talk a little bit about himself or herself.
No, he'll be here, that's 22nd.
No, oh, he'll be at the board on the 22nd.
On the 22nd or
We're
9th?
we're on a meeting on the 29th, but he starts on the 22nd.
Well, this is,
He'll have a week under his belt to tell us what he's accomplished.
well,
He has an office, yeah, but you're right. But introduce
Would
him
be-
at that point in time.
he's got a portfolio.
Yeah.
She's got, will have a portfolio.
Oh. Attorney Todd, Fahey. What the name is. You're on mute.
I said Attorney Todd, my kids used to call me that. It's funny. Who is going to be responsible for the work plan for and the onboarding of this new person? So who's doing that? I mean, I know we're administratively attached to DHHS, but I think that needs to happen. So we're all kind of clear about what direction is expected and such.
I think I'd break it down into a couple of components. One is the operational side of the, as far as the office, the telephone, the computers and all of that stuff. I'm gonna look to Attorney Barry to lead that charge. As far as onboarding with the board, with policy, we need to be clear. Because Dr. Wood talked about this earlier, that he is very adept and very knowledgeable, has done a lot of policy work. But we have to be clear with him that he's here to work on policy created by the board, not for him to create policy on his own. So therefore, I think what Dr. Sherman, if he's okay with it, is when he onboards him, is explain to him.
I'm onboarding him.
No, just being clear that he understands his role.
Whoa.
Just his role. His role, just have a meeting with him and talk about that as far as, and.
Sure.
So do we have a document we can all look at to figure out that we're all on the same page about what this person will do once they come to the Granite State?
No, we do not, but that's a great idea. I'll work on it and see if I can get it out to the board or.
Attorney Todd just volunteered.
You volunteered? Oh, okay. then-
Attorney Todd, you know what? I will. Attorney Todd did volunteer. Yes, I'm happy to help.
That's it. That's a relief to Dr. Sherman for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sherman. I appreciate that. I hope you enjoy your holidays. Thanks.
Yeah, by the way, Attorney Todd is a major upgrade over what my kids called me as a butt doctor. I'm envious.
Oh. Thank you.
That's
All right.
gonna go in the minutes.
No.
Notice where that wound up.
And before we close, are there any more comments from the public that we want to, I see a hand back there. Mr. Barrett?
Real quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because your first presentation this morning during public comment was on behalf of someone in the state plan. And Senator Roosevelt brought up the Senator Innes's bill on coupon co-pays, Senate Bill 354, I think she said it is. I think it's important to know that bill as written applies only to commercial insurance. Will not apply to the state employees plan, for what it's worth.
And commercial insurance that's fully regulated by NHID, it's like 17% of the market.
When you take away public payers and
A risk
Medicaid, the rest of the self-employed, you're sure.
We're talking about a pretty small
Right.
slice,
Right.
but it's what we can do.
Sure, I guess,
I mean,
not
Medicaid.
hoping to not draw ire from any of my peers, but you cannot impact ERISA plans.
Right,
But you can impact your own state employees.
and Medicaid.
Yeah, sure. For what it's worth. So, like I said, there was a state employees plan presentation, if you will, somebody that's in the plan, but that bill does not impact currently the state employees plan.
It's just an interesting idea.
What is the intent of Senate Bill 354? What are we trying to do with co-pays and so forth?
So, as I understand it, if you get if you're part of some kind of patient assistance from a drug manufacturer, some insurance plans are saying, well, that doesn't count towards your deductible. So you're getting, I don't know, let's say $5,000 of assistance. But you still have to pay that $5,000 deductible. And some states have said, we're not going to allow that. And this bill is going to be before our legislature this year.
So in
So
other
that
words,
would count.
so it would count toward the deduction.
Mhm.
Okay. Which goes back to, this is back to the question, I think, about affordability. And affordable to whom? Because one of the things I've heard from some of the other states is the concern that if the manufacturer eliminates the patient financial involvement, then you could have a situation where the patient, because of the incentives or with the coupons and so forth, they're using more expensive products because there's no downside to them.
That's why I
We
brought up,
already have that happening,
who are
don't we?
we working on behalf of?
There was an effort like 4 years ago in the legislature.
No, and it's back this year too.
Back
in a
again.
different
Okay,
bill.
no, and I understand that, but there was. I can't remember who the state rep was, but you probably.
Garrett
remember.
Muscatella.
That's it, yeah,
But it's back this year from Kevin Havard.
yeah, so Heidi has a hand.
Heidi,
I can try to shed some
Yeah.
clarity on this, so, so Senator Avard's bill was SB 555, that's the one, when I mentioned that number earlier, that's about rebates. Rebates are different from coupons.
Right.
So Senator Innes's bill was on coupons, and you're correct, it only targets the fully insured market here in New Hampshire. Coupons are viewed by the federal government as kickbacks, and they're prohibited in any federal program, Medicaid, Medicare, VA, etc. We have had some conversations with Senator Innes and to improve the consumer protection aspects of his bill and address what you're talking about. We want to encourage people to be using lower cost medications. We don't want to be driving people toward higher cost medications just because they have a coupon. Representative Muscatel's bill a number of years ago was looking to ban the use of coupons. Senator Innes's bill is not seeking to ban the use of coupons. It's how the coupon is treated with respect to somebody meeting or not meeting their deductible. And the way many insurers view it is that what the patient has paid out of pocket, out of their own pocket, that is eligible to count toward the deductible. If they're getting a coupon from the manufacturer, which goes from the manufacturer to the pharmacy and back to the manufacturer, that shouldn't be part of reaching your deductible. The example I'll give is that if I'm in my office and I need office supplies, and I go down to Staples, and as I'm walking through the door, I see a coupon for 20% off the paper that I need to buy when I'm there. And the paper's $100 and I get $20 off. When I go back to my office to fill out my expense report, I should be filling out my expense report for $80, not for $100. It's what I spent out of pocket. So just an attempt at an analogy, but at any rate, back to the coupon bill, you're right, it only targets commercial market, and it's what is regulated by the insurance department here in New Hampshire. So if you are employed by an out-of-state employer, even if it's a fully insured product, if that out-of-state employer doesn't have brick and mortar here in New Hampshire, that's another segment of people who are not covered when they're doing these types of mandates.
And you can't cover, right? You
Right,
can't
so it's
regulate.
to Senator Rosenwald's point, which is an excellent one, and one I try to make a lot. Anytime we're looking to do these types of mandates, we're really targeting a very narrow segment of the entire.
But it's what we
insurance
can
market-
do.
Insurance market here in New Hampshire, and it's really the small businesses. Often we exclude the individual market because the state doesn't want to be liable for the expense. And so it gets targeted really at small business, small to medium sized businesses. And what we're seeing here in New Hampshire, it used to be that that self-funded products were really for the largest, like the Fidelities of the world or whatever. And over time, we've seen smaller and smaller businesses move toward the self-funded market. And I just recently had a conversation with somebody that works at a company here in Concord that's probably has 50 people, and they are actually looking to go to a self-funded.
Gary,
market.
can I ask?
Yeah.
So would the commercial carriers that are covered by this bill, would they say their official pushback be what you're basically doing is you're going to be either deriving up premiums or we are going to have to increase what would that be that co-pays go towards? Or, yeah, the co-pays, right? So,
Any aspect, yeah,
so you're gonna have to increase in the package that you're selling, either increase the total co-pay to account for this, or you're going to have to increase your premium to.
all of the benefit design, you're exactly right. Any aspect of benefit design, whether it's premiums would obviously be the major factor that, you know, co-pays, co-insurance, even what services are covered. So yes, and we're working with Senator Anderson, the suggestions that we had talked with him about that he was in full support of. We're supposed to make it into the as introduced version, but I think it'll become, I think it will make it go.
And
The
the
rest to address
Senator
these costs.
Avart's bill, currently, if there are rebates, they have to go to the insurance companies to reduce premiums.
So,
But his bill would say the rebate goes to the customer.
50/50.
Well, I think, yeah, something like that at the point of sale, but don't rebates come in like months later?
Yeah.
So,
That's another 45-minute discussion.
yeah. But.
so there are a
But they
bunch
don't-
of,
This doesn't impact.
couple of
our
pharmaceutical
That's exactly.
Constituency, right?
coming out of
Yeah.
the Senate.
So the bottom line, though, as we were just talking about, this doesn't impact the group that we're focused on, right?
No,
Well,
Okay.
it might affect the state plan.
Right.
As far as we've seen the language, that also applies only to the fully insured commercials. Not
Okay,
applied to the
so not.
It's-
state
which,
plan.
you know, I can respond, sort of happy. Look, you know, and say, well, it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander.
Mhm.
And it would be nice to see a fiscal impact on the state employees plan if it were extended to them. And I think you would see that it would be a significant hit to the state.
Premiums would go up.
So it would be bad for, it would be the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
If it were applied, right, but my point is, if it's that significant an impact to the state plan. The state should also not be okay with shifting that impact to the commercial carriers. And Dr. Azis can help me out while I look it up, because I did have it pulled up. We're talking
It's 30 to
tens of millions of dollars. Your 2023 report rebates saved commercial plans.
was $38 per member. per month.
38 per minute.
Right, and then the aggregate was pretty high.
This is your story, Curtis.
Oh, yeah. So I in fact had that pulled up.
We're helping you rehearse for the.
I appreciate that. So, it was $38 per member per month, $456 per member per year. That's the savings on applying the rebates to the benefit overall, right? Reducing as the statute requires.
Interesting.
one of the things that, which I don't, maybe we talked about when we bring it to us in January. Is that if the rebate is based upon the list price. Before you get down to the net price. Is the patient paying percentage of the list price, percentage of the net price? Because if they're paying a percentage of the list price, then they're not really benefiting from that rebate. It goes back to the plan design, it's rebate. But it's sort of one of those things where all of a sudden that you have greater patient out of pocket because the list price is up, the copay is off the list price, not off the price.
Part of the answer is that rebates, pharmaceutical manufacturers offer rebates in exchange for better placement on the tier.
Right.
So they would be placed on a lower, what the pharmaceutical manufacturer is going to get is being placed on a lower tier. Lower tiers have lower copays, and generally going to a lower tier gets you out of the co-insurance tier and down into a copay tier.
Yeah,
Quick question. You remember the comment that one of the presenters made that the commercial carriers will keep on their formulary a drug that is more expensive than what Mayo could have used because they're getting a back end rebate that makes it less expensive for the insurance company, but not less expensive for the provider or whoever's giving the drug, in that case, Mayo. If you changed that, then presumably you'd take away the incentive for the carrier to use the more expensive drug and decrease the cost, enhance the decreased costs that they saw across the Mayo system. What would be the downside for you, other than, I guess you would turn it into increased premiums if you couldn't get the cheapest drug for you? But
Well, I
isn't it
think
cost shifting if you do that?
I think part of it is, again, getting back to the tiers. And so what tier has the patient been moved into, and rebates will help get the a lower tier. The other thing to keep in mind in terms of rebates helping reduce premiums. The other issue is that when rebates reduce the overall cost of the system, the actuarial value comes into play, where that's based on net expenses after rebates, so cost sharing across the medical and the drug is all reduced by rebates. So I think there's a carriers are looking at it from a system perspective.
So in saying that, they could help you understand, but in essence, a patient that's on a expensive biologic, it doesn't benefit from the net price. They're helping to drive down the premium for everybody else. Because the rebate's going to the system and not to them.
But I think the benefit that is occurring for them is that the rebate has gotten them to a lower cost tier where they should be out of the co-insurance tier into a copay tier, which is.
But it just didn't benefit the entity that's purchasing the drug in the first place, which in that case is Mayo.
Yeah, that's a point that they made, Sam and I made a note that we sort of said.
Be great. Actually,
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. All right, so I think we'll wrap this up. Is there any more comments before I adjourn the meeting or have a motion to adjourn? No. Well, I say thank you. It's been another insightful conversation, so go. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
And I'll catch up with both of you, in some capacity. Attorney Todd, have a great holiday. Enjoy the family. Okay, take care now.
Same to you all. Thanks.
Yeah,